My name is Prateek, and I'm working as a front-end engineer at a company called Razorpay. I work for the payments BU. We deal with a lot of data in terms of payments, users' data on day-to-day basis. And I was fortunate enough to be a part of team which deals a lot with users' payment data, because of which I was able to understand a lot about fintech in general. But at the same time, as an engineer, it becomes a responsibility, how we are handling the application in general, especially when you are quite focused on the UI UX part of it, because the whole selling point of any fintech company is more about the user experience and design. And I'm working primarily on React, and React has been amazing so far. Like I've been working in React for about 4 years. I started when React 16 just came in the picture, and people were just going crazy about it. And I've seen the growth so far with every version that they are releasing, with every change that they are releasing. Things are going much more simpler for developers. But at the same time, I also feel that with so many options available in the market, so many options in terms of design patterns, in terms of API, this is also going to create some sort of confusion about what decision to make. So the topic for my talk is composition over context. The name can be confusing, as in it can turn out to be in a debate like, should we really choose composition over context? And this is not something new. So this was a hot topic for a while, about 2 years back, 2, 3 years back. But somehow people missed it. I don't know why, but this is quite powerful. And my agenda for this talk is not about convincing people that, hey, maybe you should use composition over context, or maybe context over composition, whatever. It's more about, while using context, you can actually create a layer of composition as well, and they can go side by side. And I'll share, before moving further, I'll share a story where me and my colleague actually decided to work on a project which was quite complicated and quite UI heavy, along with data. Like too much of information had to be replicated in the components, and there was a quite nested component that we were dealing with, and it was everything was from scratch. And the interesting part is we were actually working on an internal project, and the general mindset of developers in any company, it's mainly because of the business requirement and the bandwidth requirements, that we often don't much focus on the UI UX of the internal projects, because hey, operations people maybe are using, or maybe the internal people are using, and the only agenda to get things out of that project is business. As long as, and as soon as we are able to solve the problems, as soon as we are able to close the deals, we are good to go. But I don't know why I had this kind of OCD where I wanted to implement something similar to what we were having in the customer side application, and we wanted to replicate a similar kind of behavior. So I thought, maybe why not create a component from scratch? Because at that point of time, we didn't have any kind of capability of sharing components across the repositories, especially this particular component. So we decided to build it from scratch, and I realized that when I was looking for the code on the customer facing application that I was trying to replicate in the internal application, things looked very crazy to me, mainly because we were consuming a lot of data, and then on the basis of that data, we were doing a lot of manipulation in the UI. Since browsers are so much powerful these days, we often try to exploit everything possible, because hey, again, it's available for free, and why not make good use of it, because our machines are also powerful. But at the same time, when we are working on React, and when we as engineers have to ship products, have to ship applications, we often forget the fact that we also need to make use of new features that React is offering. I mean, as a product engineer, you often don't realize that you have to try new patterns as well, and maybe they can actually help you solve the problem in a better way. So similarly, I had a problem with composition. No, I had a problem with context API. We were primarily relying on context API for a lot of data, and it turned out to be a similar kind of situation where developers often rely on Redux or any kind of other state management library, where the whole application is relying on data which has been stored as a central source of truth, single source of truth, and we are just consuming data from there. So whatever dump we want to put, we simply put in Redux. I'm not saying we do this, but in general, this is a mentality of front-end engineer when you are in that spree of shipping a lot of applications and a lot of code. So similarly, we had this kind of issue, and so this is the backstory that I wanted to tell, and I wanted to change some myth. You can call my personal agenda or whatever, but I wanted to just convey that if you are a front-end engineer, even if you are a back-end engineer, don't lose the focus on the internal projects. I mean, they can hold a lot of value. They're not garbage. I mostly have seen that internal projects are very bad in terms of UX, user experience. And I feel that whenever you are building an application, you're building it for a user, right? And if user is not satisfied, if user is not having good feeling about that project, then I think your job is still pending, and you should do your job maybe in a better way. And especially when you already know your tools better. And the second myth is design pattern really doesn't matter. So I have learned this thing in a very hard way, mainly because whenever some sort of new hype is coming on tech, Twitter, or LinkedIn, or wherever is possible, like I myself never see React conferences because it gives me some sort of FOMO. Because in first go, I never understand anything, mainly because I'm not very much aware about the tech and trends. Because I feel that some trends come and go, like I don't mean to offend anyone, but like render props in React. I mean, these kind of trends come and go, but they don't become regular part of your development ecosystem. Because of which, developers like me often ignore these things and they don't rely on this because we know after some version this particular pattern will change. Again, we have to update the code accordingly. And the third myth, of course, if it's hype, it's the best. Well, that's not true. I've been in hype train a lot. I've jumped to hype train of tech Twitter, where people actually preach about their tools. Of course, if something has worked out well for them, maybe it has some sort of impact, but that doesn't mean that it will be impactful for you. What's the solution for this? I think the solution is to just keep trying things in your side projects or in a small application that you can try. And I think internal projects are the best way to try these things because, hey, again, it's not the priority, right? So why not just try something new and implement it? And let's figure out, okay, is it really working out well for us? And fortunately, this thing actually worked out quite well for us. Me and my colleague both spent a lot of time on this, building the particular component. I'll show you the. I can't show you directly what exactly we built because again, it's part of policy, and it's an internal project, so it's quite risky. So, but I can show you a quite a blueprint which is quite similar to that design, and I'll show you where the complexity actually arises. But before moving to that part, I hope everyone is clear with context API. If not, I'll just give you a brief overview. It's quite simple. It's just a fancy word. So context is a data layer which can be shared across all the components. Basically, the whole point of using context is to create a single source of truth, and from there you can get the data, just like you use it in Redux. It's just that you need to avoid the concept of prop drilling. Well, again, prop drilling can be overwhelming for newbies over here, but prop drilling is nothing but literally drilling down your props from one component to another without even making use of it. For example, let's say there's a prop in component A, and which is being passed from the parent, and then it is being passed to component B, and then it is being passed to component C, and then it is being utilized in the component C. So component A and component B are not utilizing it for any kind of functionality. They're literally just passing it down. And that's a concept we call it prop drilling. And the context API solves this particular problem quite well. In fact, any kind of state management problem, state management libraries are actually solving this problem quite well. There has been a debate before if context is going to replace Redux. Again, I've been on both the sides. But now my current side is context cannot replace Redux. I mean, Redux has their own utilities. It can solve much more things, but often Redux is dependent on that similar kind of pattern, right? But you can try to replicate a similar kind of behavior of Redux with use context and use reducer now, which is more about dispatching actions on the base of that and maintaining the state in the context over here. So yeah, so this is something that we usually do on day-to-day basis. I'm pretty sure if you are a seasoned React developer, you might have used it. And this is how our context API in application currently being used. This is just an example. So basically, you first create a context, you define an initial value like that, and then the similar kind of API that we have is it has a provider and a consumer. So basically, on top level, you provide it, and then it gets down to the all the components that are inside it, and the props are available over there. And similarly, this style component can utilize using use context by consuming the context that we create in the first place, and then it is being available to us. This works out quite well, and it's quite a clean piece of code as well. Even for the big applications, when you go, it's mostly clean, but let's see forward. So what the heck is composition then, and why do we even need composition? So it's nothing new, honestly. If you have used JSX, not just JSX, if you have used any kind of reusable components in any kind of framework, you're like there's a high chance that you might have already used it. And composing is a natural term. Like it's not a software engineering term. It's actually an English word, right? So if you go by the internet, so there are two sides of it. So composition is the nature of something's ingredients or constituent, the way in which the whole and mixture is made up. I consider it as a smoothie. So basically, let's say you want to make a drink, right? And you want to add a lot of vegetables, fruits, milk, and all. So this is a particular composition of a drink, a milk drink, which we call smoothie. It has everything, but it is composed in a particular structure, and that's what we call smoothie. So this is something that you can relate it to the real life. The second definition, it says a creative work, especially a poem or a piece of music. Well, just like React is a creative work, right? And we as engineers, be it front end, back end, that's a different debate. But I think as an engineer, when you're writing code, when you are building a system, it's a creative job. It's an art and craft that you do on day-to-day basis because you literally have to think how this particular piece of code can actually look beautiful and can actually look easy to consume. Like for example, recently I've been in a discussion where I wanted to touch up upon the difference between a product engineer and a platform engineer. So basically, the job of platform engineers to build tools that can be actually utilized by the product engineers of the company. And I really have high empathy and sympathy for them because their job is quite difficult. They literally have to understand not just the business requirement, but they have to understand the developer experience because that's the number one priority. And on top of that, they also have to think about the scalability of these components or the tools that they are building because company is going to grow in business. We might be introducing new features, new type of data, and those components should actually replicate that kind of behavior. And yes, so that's when I came to know that reusability is a concept that we as developers often love to consume, but it can be a terrible thing when it comes to creating it. Because at a basic level, you are good to go, but when it comes to complex architecture, or let's say you have two, three business units in general in a company, and the company is quite stable in business, and now you want to scale it up, you literally have to understand three business units. Their design is different, the way their components interact, they are different, but you still have to build in such a way that the reusability concept is being maintained. So I'll not bore you because I know you must be bored of all the theory and also I'll just show you a simple piece of code. Again, my talk and the topic of my talk can be a little bit hyped up because this topic itself is quite debatable and people often get interest in these kind of topics. But I would say don't get high hopes and try to rather relate to what I'm going to show you. So I'll show you my code if it's there. Yep. So I'll just explain what my application is doing, and later I'll tell you uh, my work as a front-end engineer. So this is just a dummy project that I created today. I woke up at 4 and I figured out that I still don't have my demo ready. And believe me, I'm not the responsible kind. I've been working on this particular demo from last 1 week, but whenever I tried to explain this logic, it often became controversial and it mostly felt like that I'm trying to prove a point. But my agenda is not that. My agenda is to use all the technologies that we have for the better purpose and for the right purpose wherever they are suitable. So before moving to the code part, I'll show you what exactly it is doing. So being a front-end engineer, this is my work, some fancy design that I've created. It's literally a 1 hour work. I had to decide about the data and all, but I'll explain what exactly is happening over here. So we have few components over here. One is the Navbar, which is the navigation bar, and it has various kind of list properties. One is home, profile, orders, and then it's a username. This is not clickable. This is not interactive at all. It's just to show the data. Then we have a sidebar over here. It doesn't look like a sidebar, but again, let's assume that it's a sidebar. It has three sections: analytics, profile, and orders. It itself can have particular hyperlinks and some sort of routing can be implemented over here. Just like any kind of SaaS dashboard that you see, similar kind of concept can be implemented here. Then I have a profile component where my username, my pretty picture is there, and my profession is there. So this is something that my components are doing, but has been divided into multiple chunks. So I'll show you how it's being rendered. So, so I mentioned about creating context, right? So it's very basic. Basically, you create a constant as app context, you create context, you give the initial value, which is an initial object in my case, and then you basically provide it as a provider, and then the value that you pass, it can be any sort of data. In my case, it's pure JSON, but you can actually provide a lot of other stuff as well. Like you can actually provide a string over here. But JSON, again, as a JavaScript engineer, objects are best friends, right? And it makes it easy to scale this approach. So let's say you have these properties over here. You can also attach functions over here, which is like let's say show name, right? Right, and it can return a value, I believe, and let's say name is there. So it will simply return a name. So this is just an example that I'm showing. I'm not going to show the implementation of the function, but this is how you can attach it. And this particular function, when passed to context, can be available to the inner side of the component. In our case, it's only dashboard because this is the root component that has everything inside it. And that's where the problem arises actually, because we often ignore this particular pattern a lot. So let me remove this. I'll also show you what exactly is happening in the inner components. Let's go in the dashboard. So dashboard is doing nothing. Wow. So this is a sample piece of code, but in the real scenario, there are a lot of API calls can be made. There can be some route handling over here. There can be some sort of data manipulation which can happen. But for now, let's just assume that you also have some sort of similar kind of component, which is doing nothing but handling these particular three components, right? One is navbar, that is this one. Then we have a sidebar, which is this one, analytics profile orders. And then we have a details component, which is this particular reverse dev and front end engine and all. So that's all. But when we move to nav, right, nav needs data. Why? Because this is a navigation bar and it needs to show my username. In the real world scenario, you might be making an API call and that will get you some data, and you can store the session in the context, and then you can get it through context, and over here you can print it. There can be some other data as well, but for now I've assumed a ideal world scenario. So basically what's happening is I have data, app details, which I'm passing in context over here. And there are two sections in this. One is the sidebar. This is just the static data, which is not going to change. And this is metadata, which I'm assuming that will come from the API. So in the metadata, we have two things. I'm a big fan of e-commerce platform. Unfortunately, I never got a chance to work on e-commerce, but I really admire whatever e-commerce is doing in this world. So my examples are purely based on that. So one is the user data, which has username, role, profession, and the image, which is coming, probably some hosted link. And then I have some orders data, which is again going to come from the API. So my orders have, there are three items. One is PlayStation 5, then the mouse and a keyboard. And this is something that I want to consume inside my application. So what I'm doing is I am actually storing it on top level over here, and I'm passing it through context. And then it will be available to the inner components. Well, that works for us. How? Because over here, I can actually gather metadata, and from metadata, I can have a user information called reverse div, front engine, and my image. So let's go into details. Am I doing it wrong? Oh, yeah. Inside details also, I have a section name over here. I think I didn't provide section name, but let me just show you that as well. So let's say section is user info. So it gets printed like this. And the rest of the details that I'm printing, that's the section that I'm getting it from props. And then there's another component, which is user component. And inside the user, I'm trying to consume context API, right? I had metadata. Inside metadata, I had a user object. Then it had username, image, profession, just like that. Well, this works for us. In fact, it will work for even more complex projects. No big deal in that. But often there are scenarios. Well, it's not often, it's actually going to be quite short because as soon as your application grows, it will have more and more data. When more and more data, it can be coming from the API, it can be coming from the static ones that you will maintain on the client side, like I'm maintaining for sidebar over here. And what will happen is, so already you can see it's from line number 70 to 40, it's already 33 lines of code. And the production application that I was working on, it had close to 200 lines of just this context. And that became very difficult for us to really maintain it because whenever you are coding, you have that particular sense, okay, what exactly you're trying to do. But let's say you come to that particular piece of code after a month or two, or maybe some new person has joined your team and they want to understand the code. It becomes very difficult. It becomes very difficult to even read the code what that particular piece of code is doing. And in an ideal scenario like this, for a SaaS-based dashboard, which is just an example, it's applicable everywhere, it becomes very difficult to maintain it. So I did some research around it, and I figured out that people are already having this particular debate. In fact, there are some authors of very famous libraries like React Router and Remix who are having a point where they mention that composition component composition can actually replace context API. Well, whatever the examples that they have shown, I'll also tell you the video that I'm referring to. I think most of you have already seen who are seasoned React developers. I agree with that approach for the examples that they show, but I think that it can be extended. And while it cannot replace entirely in a complex application, composition can actually work along context. And that's why the name of my talk is also composition over context. So basically, context is there, and the above layer is composition. How? Let's take an example. So already context API is implemented. So this dashboard component, right? What exactly is doing? Let's take a look. I think I can open it here. Yep. So basically, dashboard is rendering nav and sidebar. And inside nav and sidebar, if we go, we have context being used, and over here, context being used. So this data is already available to us at the root level, right? And if we try, we can actually try and avoid rendering it inside a dashboard, and we can render it in app.js. How? Let me show you. And I'll also talk about a very underused, underrated prop of React, which is called children. And we'll make use of that in this. So I can write it like this, right? And you might have an opinion, okay, now we are rendering it nav and sidebar. The whole purpose of using context gets exploited, right? And that's what my plan is. So let's say children. Yep, it's good to go. And since nav, okay, remove this. And nav accepts, okay. Yep, nav accepts metadata. Inside metadata, we have user and username. So what I can do is I can actually provide user and I can get rid of this, right? But let's say I comment this down, I pass a prop as user. And notice over here, I'm not doing prop drilling and I'm actually going to make use of actual props being utilized. So pass, I'll pass user. How? So we have app details over here. Dot metadata dot user. In an ideal world scenario, you should also have these checks. Otherwise, it can create a big trouble if you are not using TypeScript. For this example, I've used JavaScript. Otherwise, I would highly recommend that you use any sort of type-based language because this can help you prevent a lot of errors, by the way. So let's see what exactly sidebar is expecting. And sidebar is expecting sections. Okay. So it will come as sidebar sections. Okay. It is part of our data only. So why not just pass the sections? Okay, instead of this, we can do this, right? And we can pass sections, app details, and sidebar and sections. Yep. So it's there. Let's see if it's being used. And also, if you'll notice, we are able to remove a lot of code. Of course, that comes with its own cost. Can we try and refresh this? Oh, wow, it's working fine. It has my username already coming. It has all the information which is coming. And only a small change has been done. Instead of rendering dashboard, I'm just rendering the children alongside it. And I can pass anything. Now it gives me even more flexibility. If I want, let's say my product manager comes in the picture and suddenly he or she asks me, hey dude, I really need to introduce a new feature, so can you just build it like that? And me being a front-end engineer and being a React fan would say, okay, that's easy because I can make a reusable component. But let's say I've already created a dashboard component. What I'll do is I'll just go inside dashboard and I'll pass another component. But in ideal world scenario, these things happen 50-50. Like there can be a situation where you literally have to go to the foundation of the code and you have to change everything. So in that case, you need to make your components also quite flexible. If your components are not flexible, you might face issues in terms of scaling your code architecture. What do I mean by that? Let's say inside dashboard, right, which is this particular whole component, I suddenly realized that I want to introduce something else. Let's say after sidebar, I want to say there's a paragraph and it shows total hits. And for now, I'm just mentioning it as a static one. So basically, I'm using the dashboard component. I have nav over here, I have sidebar, and I'm able to pass a new component that is a paragraph. In your case, it can be anything. So this is how it's being done. But it can actually scale even further. What do I mean by that? Basically, I don't support this particular approach a lot uh, for for replacing the context API. What I mean is, let's say there's a sidebar, right? Well, we all know that a sidebar component which looks very simple like this, it will not be simple in your production applications. There will be other components which will be involved in this. Now it comes to your file structure and how you want to structure your components over here. So what I would have done, and I have actually done it, is creating a particular directory for that. Then in the components that are related to section will come, not section actually, sidebar. And inside the sidebar, I can have a sidebar item, I can have a sidebar menu, I can have sidebar links, anything. And that can be maintained over here. And there can be an index.js file which can actually work as our app.js file. What do I mean by that? So basically, your sidebar, right, over here, you can actually maintain a separate context for just sidebar, and you can utilize whatever data that you want to do. And what will happen is it will help you in maintaining and scaling your application in terms of component architecture quite well, because now you have a separate context for sidebar and you can pass whatever data that you want to do, and it will have nothing to be related to the other components. And basically you are able to escape a lot of garbage values. uh, we can't really say garbage values, but you can actually say a lot of unused things which are not being used in the other component. Like in our case, apart from sidebar, in footer or details, these things might not be used. And whatever things that are required in the sidebar context, if we go by the English language, will be quite structured in the sidebar. And whatever information that I just showed you on the app.js part, the composition, same thing can be applied in the sidebar index.js as well. This will help you in composing your components quite well. This will also help you giving more visibility how your JSX is being implemented. And what the demo that I showed you just now for React Children uh, over here, people have done some amazing work regarding that. Like they also try to exploit this particular prop in some libraries as well, and some projects and some products as well. So you have a lot of flexibility regarding this. And the problem is people often don't rely on this a lot because there has not been much awareness around it, like how you can make good use of children prop. And people keep on just either go with the prop drilling concept, which in my scenario, everyone should hate it, because that's literally like creating more and more junk data for your components to utilize. Because often that when prop drilling is a concept, because the data that is being passed to us is just for the sake of passing it to another component, and we are literally acting as a messenger over here between two components. So in that scenario, children can be a good use, and you can actually play quite well. Children is basically in form of array, and it's quite iterable, I think. So even people have done some children.map and all, and after that, on the basis of a particular child, you can check if the child is particular element. You can do some sort of manipulation. Like sky's the limit in this. So this is something that I wanted to share. It's a very small example, and I really want you to go through the resource that I'm going to share, because I got my initial motivation and inspiration from that particular video. It's a video by Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson from the team over here. I'll show you. So this is the, I'll share the PPT. Over here, he went in a debate because he tweeted something regarding replacing the context API by composition, but people actually have commented on this YouTube video that it's not ideal in the production application, and maybe we can make good use of that. I mean, it's a whole new debate that has been going on. So this is something that I wanted to share because it's a design pattern that we often don't use in our production applications, because the mentality of front-end engineers, especially when they are given the design, is to just ship as fast as possible. And reusability is a myth in most of the cases. Like it's very hard to make everything reusable. You need dedicated time, And some teams also follow this approach where they try to first ship the code and they actually take few days to refactor that code again. I believe that if you have some sort of design pattern like this where you can create a temporary flexibility, like with the help of children prop and making use of component composition, I think your application can scale quite well. You will have more flexibility in introducing new components. You'll have more flexibility in even changing the data and even changing the manipulation of the existing components, because now you have flexibility, something like this that I showed in app.js. I mean, this still is very underrated, and maybe I'm not able to show you the exact thing that you can achieve. But the idea is to start from the base. Even when I try to migrate my own piece of code that I created completely in Context API. And me and my colleague were doing the PR reviews when we were introducing new features, realized that, hey, this is not at all scalable. And we are literally bloating our app details over here, the context that we are providing. And in the first impression itself, it never looked beautiful, at least. Like it never looked something to be proud of. Of course, context is great. Context is amazing. It is solving a problem, but it is not enough for everything. And that's why I think this particular pattern, which is quite old, by the way, that's the whole point of writing JSX, right? And we are not utilizing the whole power of JSX here. So this is something that I wanted to share, and that's it from my side. But if you want to connect with me or you have any questions, feel free to connect with me on these social media handles. And before going, I would like to give you a glimpse, because I don't like to just explain things on the air. I'll show you our a blueprint of the application of the product that we made. It's not the exact design, but it's just more like an inspiration from that. So basically, we had a modal over here, and this modal opens. Okay, there's a close button over here. Then there's a sidebar which has tab 1, tab 2, tab 3. These tabs are basically changing the route of your browser. Then from the params, when the route changes, on the basis of params, we make an API call based on whatever tab that we have selected. Whatever tab we select, route changes, this whole detail component over here, that also gets changed. But that's not the only thing that we have done. The the beauty of internal projects is you can forget about UX for a while and you can try and solve problems in terms of business needs. And that's what the requirement was. Like, instead of having a single label, we had some database field values. And that was more like, first we had initial parent value, then on the basis of that, we have a sub value, and then we have the last nested value. On top of that, this basically shows some information that should be updated. And this is a component which can be a checkbox, radio button, input box. And again, it depends on whatever kind of data that we actually get. In this particular, if I can just select it. So this particular section, then this particular section, and this particular section. I mean, it is so flexible that whatever data that you want to pass from the context, it will change. But context, again, in our case, it was bloating. I'm not saying that you will need this kind of design pattern in every scenario, but whenever you are dealing with some nested components, in my case, there was this section which had a hyperlink, then it had checkbox, radio button, then it had editable input box, text area, then there's a next call to action button, and it goes till like tab 1, tab 2, tab 3, and in the last it goes like submit. And after the submission, there's a prompt which asks for whatever data that you have filled in the whole form. By the way, this whole model consists of an inner form which has all the data that you have selected, and that data gets submitted to API. Even while submitting, we have to put on some conditions. We have to do some sort of client side validation over here, and on the basis of used to send. So the complexity was literally insane, and we wanted to reduce it from the developer's point of view. And we were quite successful. Like, it has been one of my finest pieces of code that I've written, and I'm really proud of it, because we were able to solve the discrepancies that we only introduced in our code thinking that, okay, maybe this is the best pattern that we are following, that is, again, relying on context or Redux, whatever. And we figured out that, okay, this is not enough. We really need to make use of other things like React composition. And that was the whole point of having this particular session. I just wanted to let developers know, having this awareness, whenever you are working in React, uh, don't just rely on a particular YouTuber, don't just rely on a particular tech trend that you are seeing these days. Try everything and figure out if it is making good use of it. Like, I found this one very nice article about reusability. I'll also tag this in my PPT after the session. It's by Formidable Labs. They do some amazing work in terms of shipping projects, and they have even a better approach than what I have suggested over here. They think that context API can actually be good, but on top of that, you can have React composition. But even after that, you can actually extend this particular approach, and that is, you can actually introduce custom hooks over here, which can actually try and uh, be used to reduce the complexity even further. Because a lot of data that we are consuming, a lot of data manipulation across the components are either relying on some sort of utility functions, or maybe the sort of manipulation that we are doing, it's quite repetitive. And in that case, you can actually make good use of custom hooks. You can actually make good use of custom hooks whenever you want to have same type of data as well. But often there are scenarios where pattern doesn't look like it is similar, but the data that you want, it's quite similar. So in that case, you can make use of custom hooks. They have given an example of Accordion, which, by the way, as a front-end engineer, is quite difficult to implement, because as soon as it grows, it gets really, really complex. While I was trying this example, I really thought that maybe I can build Accordion, but it's not that easy. They have introduced some basic features in that, and it's one of the finest blog posts that I've read so far in terms of building an accordion. Like, people go with the more complex approach, but it's no longer needed. And then they have this container components thing, which I actually introduced with children property, and they are doing the same thing. So I'll attach this particular link in my PPT, and you can take a look. And this can be a good discussion so far. Like, whatever I have suggested right now, it's not enough. So I would genuinely appreciate if someone can come up with an approach where they have either used it, or after my session they can just go ahead and make use of React composition and let me know the results, like how it solved your problem. Because this can be extended further. Like, when I was preparing my PPT, I didn't know like there's this article as well. Maybe I didn't research it properly, but they have made good use of custom hooks, which can be a game changer in this case. So yeah, that's